What is the terminal showing us, Sonali, that's new here?
There's a few things here, and there's Bitcoin prices to start with. We have to talk about Bitcoin because of the last week. It did decline most of the last week, Emily, with an extra nearly 3% drop, more than 2% drop over the last 24 hours or so. But when you look at Bitcoin over the last week, we do have to look at the other coins as well, the other cryptocurrencies as well, and see how they fared in relation to them. We know Bitcoin is falling alongside other risk assets like stocks, but if you look at Ethereum here, it did have a steeper decline than Bitcoin had. It's not that all of them are doing so poorly, though, in the last week. If you take a look at Tether, it's remained not only fairly stable, it's actually getting a little bit of a lift over the last day and the last 7 days here. So we are seeing a difference here between the stable coins and the more traditional cryptocurrencies as we take a look about the meaning of cryptocurrencies in this new era we're headed into.
All right, Sonali, thank you. Stay with us. I want to bring in our next guest, FTX U.S. President Brett Harrison, to talk about their expansion to Europe and the Middle East and so much more. Brett, obviously so much going on in the crypto market right now. This question of whether crypto is decoupled from more traditional assets or not. Meantime, you've got this big launch in Europe, in the Middle East. Why now, and when will we actually see these new services begin?
Sure. So FTX operates globally. Between FTX and FTX US, we operate in over 180 jurisdictions. But in many of those jurisdictions, it hasn't been completely clear exactly what regulation, what licensing is required in order to be able to operate and expand the services that we can offer to citizens and in these different jurisdictions. And so what we've been doing is working in every country possible to get licensed in any way that we can, so that we are fully set to offer all the services that we can in a licensed way. And this is very much to counteract this narrative that crypto companies are operating outside of the regulatory regimes and envelopes, that they want to avoid being able to have the same kind of rules applied to them as traditional financial markets. It's the opposite for us. We want to be a part of the regulatory discussion and work cooperatively with the different agencies in these different countries to be able to be regulated. And so we're very excited about FTX EU. We have the SciSec approval to be able to offer that ftx.com/EU domain in the different places where we can passport that particular license. And we'll be able to launch within a couple of days all those services.
Well, speaking of changing regulation, there has been increasing pressure on crypto exchanges to block Russian clients in accordance with sanctions. You've got Coinbase saying that they are now doing this. What is FTX's position on this? Are you blocking sanctioned Russian entities or users?
We have been blocking sanctioned Russian entities from the start, from before even the war with Ukraine had started. FTX as an exchange is required, for example, by FinCEN to be able to uphold AML and sanctions according to the various sanction lists that we check. That includes the OFAC sanctions list, FBI most wanted, Interpol consolidated sanctions lists. And we do an extraordinary job of making sure that those sanctioned entities and individuals cannot transact cryptocurrency through the exchange. It's a different matter entirely to consider whether we would, on our own, make the private decision as a company to block every single Russian user, regardless of their appearing on those lists or not. And so we're in constant dialogue with Treasury, with members of the Treasury who are telling us what they want us to do in terms of helping to uphold the global public policy decisions that they are working on with the executive branch.
Speaking of keeping an eye on what users are doing and what was happening over at Coinbase, I mean, the idea that 25,000 addresses had to be blocked as a result of their own kind of internal look under the hood here. Bring us under the hood over there a little more at FTX, because what is the scale of which users around the world could be engaged in illicit activity, and where is it mostly coming from?
Right. I read that report from Coinbase, and if you dig in, most of those addresses were found from prior to when the conflict started. And so I think what Coinbase was trying to do is show that, look, there's been discussion back and forth about whether cryptocurrency exchanges like Coinbase and FTX are actually doing their job of holding sanctions. The answer is we are. And in fact, every single day, we have to block sanctioned activity, whether that's from Russia or from any other particular nation or individual appearing on these sanction lists. And that didn't start just now with the conflict in the Ukraine.
I'm wondering also, when you take a look at kind of the broader way that people are thinking about cryptocurrency in this era, as you expand into Europe, as you look at the ruble conversion, not just to Bitcoin, but to stable coins, which is apparently happening at an even greater scale, how do you see this conversion over from traditional currencies moving into digital assets?
So what we're seeing, for example, in the Ukraine is people converting cryptocurrencies into the fiat currency into cryptocurrency. It's a natural thing to do in a wartime economy where there might be uncertainty about the currency. In other nations, maybe not during wartime, but they also might have hyperinflating currencies, and they're looking for some flight to a more safer asset that they're able to transport cross-border easily, as long as they're not sanctioned. And so we see that as a very real thing that's happening right now, especially if you look at all of the activity, cryptocurrency activity entering Ukraine to help aid the effort there, whether it's directly to Ukraine addresses or to NGOs on the ground helping with humanitarian efforts. So I think this is showing a lot of the power of cryptocurrency as this instant settlement cross-border payment that can be a flight from currencies that might not be stable.
Right, but is it really? I mean, if you look at the drop in Bitcoin today, it's certainly gone down with the rest of the market. And I know we're going day by day here, but longer term, what is the recommendation to new, potentially aspiring crypto investors as to how to think about this asset and whether you're facing more or less risk here than in something more traditional?
Of course. If you look at Bitcoin prices themselves, there is definitely volatility. But if you look at Bitcoin prices, maybe, for example, versus the Turkish lira, that graph still tends to go up and to the right. If you have a country with a currency that's hyperinflating, if people don't want to invest in the asset itself that might have this volatility risk to it, what they can do is they can convert to a stable coin like USDC, which is completely one-to-one reserve back with the dollar, in which case they can store their assets in a digital form that is completely stable and pegged to the dollar, and therefore be able to escape the risk from their own currency hyperinflating. And so that's a way in which people can still interact with the digital currency system, but not necessarily leg into the risks associated with volatile currencies that they may be less certain about.